they're taking their side hustle, right? Like a lot of people start with a side hustle. So they have a full-time gig that they're doing, but they obviously have entrepreneurial skills. So they start some sort of a side hustle. And that gives them the taste or the flavor of the freedom that they could have if they were running their own show. And so eventually that, one overtakes the other. And then they eventually take the side hustle to the full-time gig, and then the full-time gig is gone. But it does take a leap of faith, as you know. I mean, there are times when there's no revenue coming in and you're looking at the bank statement and you're looking at the sales funnel, you're going, geez Louise, if I don't do something, these two things, we're headed for disaster. And eventually something happens.
Martians landed.
Yes.
Wearing Prada suits.
Yes.
Drinking Henry's seltzer.
Yes.
Chewing juicy fruit.
Yes, and?
Your branding here.
Yes, brand.
Your message here.
Yes, and?
A verse about.
Yes.
Your product here.
Yes.
I'm Hirsch Redford.
Yes, and?
I'm a message therapist.
Yes.
And I have a podcast.
Yes, brand.
That's right, that's it.
Yes.
We'll help you fix the world.
Yes.
Or your bottom line.
All right.
Your bottom line.
Get it. I get it. Welcome to the Yes Brand Podcast.
In the hot seat today on Yes Brand is Trish Tonaj. Trish is an author. She's an artist. She is the founder and host of shareyourstories.online, which I have been on. My podcast drops in a couple of days. I'm going to be speaking for the organization, so we'll get into all of that. But it's a passion project, and it was built on a platform of mentorship and breaking barriers to success. Trish features global entrepreneurs, enterprise leaders sharing their great ideas. And as a podcast host, she introduces the person behind the logo, which I love, in Business Mentorship, Keepin It Real. In 2024, the SYS Community introduced marketing grants, funding for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. And pursuing her passion for the arts, Trish is trading a pen for a paintbrush, creating original works of art, and inviting you to enjoy a splash of color. Her books are Breaking Barriers, 10 Entrepreneurial Women Share Their Stories, and A Diary of Change, 12 Personal Tools. Trish has been recognized by her peers and named Leader of the Year by Women Changing the World in the Americas. I could go on and on, but I will cut it there so that we'll have stuff to talk about. But Trish, welcome to Yes Brand.
Oh, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to meeting the people in your network.
It's great to have you here. I would like to begin with share your stories and tell us a little bit about the inspiration for this labor of love.
Well, it actually started quite a few years ago. I was on the speaker circuit with my second book, and I was meeting all kinds of amazing entrepreneurs who wanted to share their stories. Well, there's only so many hours in the day and so many days in the week. And I knew there was no way that I was going to be able to help everyone. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to increase the visibility for all these folks? So I decided to start a guest blog. And in the first year, we shared 100 stories. And then, believe it or not, there was 7 email touches with each one of those entrepreneurs. So you do the math of how many hours it was taking. So I met with my web developer and said, look, we have to automate this thing. We've got to make it easy peasy for everybody. So I purchased the URL, shareyourstories.online. My web developer and I mapped out the website, and the rest is history. Here we are with a global platform.
It is amazing. It is amazing. It's inspiring. I've told you this off camera, that I draw inspiration from the stories, and it was certainly fun sharing mine. How do you think that the world of entrepreneurism has changed since you started the Share Your Stories platform?
Well, I started Share Your Stories pre-COVID. So we actually put everything up online in 2018. And then I'm always amazed at the statistics about how many global entrepreneurs there are. 582 million entrepreneurs globally. Well,
almost spit my coffee out when you.
Isn't that that's a huge market. And I
Yes.
thought, to be able to connect with like-minded individuals, because, we all think we're so different and yet we're the same. We have so many similarities, right? I mean, the road to entrepreneurship is pretty similar for a lot of us. We all have similar challenges and opportunities. And I just thought it was a really great way when sharing other people's stories. I don't think we realize that we are role models in our communities, right?
Speaking of role models and community as well, so you've graciously invited me to do the keynote at this SYS grants event, but for the audience, share a little bit about what the marketing grants are.
So really, we decided I developed an advisory board about 2 years ago because, I didn't want the platform to become stagnant, even though I had, oodles of years of marketing experience, which I had transitioned into this passion project. I thought we want to keep it fun and interactive. So the advisory board, we did a brainstorm session and we said, okay, the number one issue still for small entrepreneurs is funding. So how do we approach that? And we decided to do the marketing grants because no one's offering money for grants. They'll give you money for specific things, but not for marketing. So we thought, okay, let's provide some money, some seed money for marketing, and let's do it funding for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. So we're actually funded by the people in the Share Your Stories network. So the folks that are doing really well have said, hey, listen, that sounds like a really great idea. I'll jump on the bandwagon for that. And they provided us with the money. We created the tagline, funding for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. And this is our inaugural year. So I'll let you know in a couple months whether, how successful we are.
Well, it's great. And it really speaks to, such an important part of the brand building process. I was talking to my son. My son's just turning 30 and he's an entrepreneur. He has a jewelry business in Manhattan. And we were talking about, revenues and how to kind of normalize your client processes and all this stuff. And he was talking about, how tough it is to be an entrepreneur. And he said, if somebody gave me $1 million today, I'd probably just put it all back into marketing. And he said it as though that might be an irresponsible thing to do. But I was like, well, if you're going to put it all into one thing,
that's a good thing to put it into.
That's a good thing to put it into. Yeah. And as you point out, Trish, nobody else is going to give you grants typically for marketing.
Right.
They think about product, they think about product development, but the marketing is so important. What are some stories that have been published on the site that have stood out to you? Are there a couple that have really resonated for you?
I have to say we have over 300 international stories on the website. And every time I read a story, I think, oh my gosh, look at that barrier that they broke. Like, look at that obstacle that they overcame. I think every single entrepreneurial story, I learned something from it. And I find that each and every one of us has had an obstacle. It doesn't come easy, right, Hirsch? I mean, I've been an entrepreneur. I venture to guess I'll date myself, but I've been an entrepreneur since 1993. So that's over 30 years. Well, there's been lots of hurdles and obstacles I've had to overcome in that number of years in order to remain successful. So I just think the resilience that we have and the passion that we seem to have for what it is that we do. Speaking about your son and his business, I used to be a retail consultant for De Beers, the diamond mining company.
Oh, yeah.
I was a national buyer for a department store here in Canada. I bought for 220 stores in jewelry. And so what's really interesting is that you take those skills and experience that we get in the JOB and those corporate jobs, and then we make the leap into entrepreneurship. So I would have to say that about 90% of the stories that we share are from people who have been corporate leaders, and then they transition into being entrepreneurs. There's probably less than 2% who come right out of school with a great idea and go, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to build this product, or I'm going to provide this service or build this program. Very few actually have that sort of light bulb moment. Most of them are folks like you and I who have had experience in something. And then we say, you know what, this isn't serving me anymore. I don't feel passionate about it. So I think I have to go out onto my own.
Well, it is interesting when you point out that the corporate experience, the JOB is the norm in terms of the path, because for me, it wasn't. I mean, the last time I was in-house somewhere was 2003 or 2002, but it was still not corporate. I was in the commercial production world and I was at a production company, and it was a big one, but it wasn't like a corporation. And so I lack that perspective, I think, in a certain way. And in the case of my son, who had done a whole bunch of different jobs and real estate and other things, just always working through school and doing all these things, and
Yeah.
then really finding his passion in jewelry, still didn't have that experience other than actually a internship at Havas, but didn't really have that experience of being in a huge corporate
Company.
structure. Do you feel like it's a requisite, or pardon the dogs, by the way, if you can hear the dogs
No, they're not
barking,
barking. No, not at all. I
but
don't think so. No, I don't think so, because I just think that what it does is it pushes you into a direction that you are going to end up in anyway. I mean, I was very entrepreneurial in the job, right? I really didn't fit in. I didn't fit in because I didn't think like everybody else. I didn't, my aspirations weren't the same as everybody else. I really was like the odd man out. And so you can only be in those environments for so long before you say, look, this is just not for me. I have to go, I have to do something on my own. So I think if your longevity is 6 months or 3 months or 6 weeks or whatever the case may be, it's just giving you an opportunity to sort of see, you know what, I've got some skills, I've acquired some experience, but maybe I need to utilize it in a different way. And most of the people on the platform have done exactly that. They've taken their leadership skills and started their own biz.
yeah. And I do think that in many ways it's a matter of time. It's
Yes,
a matter of,
absolutely.
it's a matter of hitting that point. It's a natural transition. And in some cases, it doesn't happen until, they've been in the corporate world for what we used to consider to be an entire career,
Right.
30 years, 40
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, for
And then
sure.
someone says, you know what, now I want to do this. Now I
Yep.
want to do, because more often than not, people are choosing to do a next phase,
Oh,
another
absolutely.
phase,
Yeah.
which I love. And as we've seen, there isn't really like, I'm shocked now when someone says, "Oh, I'm winding down. I'm just winding down,"
Right.
because I don't relate to it. And it seems like so many people are just staying active and doing more things, doing
Well,
more
they're taking their side hustle, right? Like a lot of
Yeah.
people start with a side hustle. So they have a full-time gig that they're doing, but they obviously have entrepreneurial skills. So they start some sort of a side hustle. And that gives them the taste or the flavor of the freedom that they could have if they were running their own show. And so eventually that, one overtakes the other. And then they eventually take the side hustle to the full-time gig, and the full-time gig is gone. But it does take a leap of faith, as you know. I mean, there are
Yeah.
times when there's no revenue coming in and you're looking at the bank statement and you're looking at the sales funnel, you're going, geez Louise, if I don't do something, these two things, we're headed for disaster. And eventually
Well,
something happens, right?
let's talk about that for a minute, because that is, you know, in the creative field, when you're relying on your creativity, let's say if you're doing stand-up comedy, as I did for a long time, you're doing something like that. Well, there's only so much you can do, but you can do certain things. But it's all kind of very linear, what you're doing. You're trying to get a certain type of gig and a certain thing, and you can do certain things to change it, or you suffer for your art, basically suffering for your art. But when you're doing something entrepreneurial and the sheets just aren't lining up, and the timing of the gigs, let's say, and the sales and whatever it is just isn't lining up, and you're like, well, I got to do something. And like you say, something happens, something will happen.
Yeah.
Usually what you rely on and what you draw on is the fact that you actually have sown the seeds. Nothing may be growing right now from that where you planted that, but
Yeah.
you may have sown seeds a year ago, 2 years ago, 6 months ago, 5 weeks ago, and something sprouts up. So it still feels like magic when that saving moment comes.
So
But
true.
what do you think it takes to be an entrepreneur and to deal with all of that instability and all of that insecurity?
I think that if you don't have a passion for what it is that you're doing, it just won't last. And in addition to that, I've noticed that nobody's really in it for the money. I mean, we all need to make money to pay the bills and do that sort of thing, but that's not the driving force behind the business venture. The driving force is whatever product or service you're providing that you feel is going to empower someone else or solve a problem for them, make life easier. Whatever that niche is, that's the thing that keeps you going. We obviously need to have the money, but it's a secondary issue. I have met folks where it's all about the money, right? Like that's the only thing that's motivating them. And you know what? They crash and burn because the money will only take you so far if you don't have passion and if you don't have a really great idea. And I've seen it. I'm sure you have too, right? Or you've just seen all they talk about is money, 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 but there's nothing, no substance behind it. And then it just doesn't last.
Well, it's also very easy to get disappointed because there's only one barometer.
That's right.
It's the only barometer. And it's like, if it's off, if your numbers are off, the best situation is where you appreciate and respect the numbers because that allows you to serve the goal that you're really after. So you don't treat money with disrespect, but you know that what you're after is really something deeper. And then the converse can happen when those sheets don't line up. You can say, well, look, here's what I have been able to do. Here's what I've been able to accomplish. Here's the value that I've added to the world. And that's like, money in the bank, so to speak, for my soul, and I see now in younger entrepreneurs, young people, that same thing. It's obviously not true across the board of anybody. It's like you say, there are people who are very transactional, very, but my audience, our audience that we've cultivated are, they're feeling those things. And I see that in younger people. I see it in people who, have done well at an early age and engaged immediately in giving back, helping other young people who haven't been able to break through as readily. I think that stuff is great. Tell me a little bit about what's in store for this event on December 4th. What should people know about it?
Well, we're making it very interactive. I think we've all spent a lot of time behind the screen in the last few years. And because this is a global event, we're obviously doing it online. But we want to engage the people who are joining us. So there's going to be breakout sessions. You're obviously doing a wonderful keynote on building a brand and selling the truth. And we're going to give people an opportunity to communicate with you, ask you questions, interact with you sort of off the stage, so to speak. And I think that's really important because you never know what you're going to learn from someone. Like just a very simple conversation, you can have a light bulb moment. Yeah. And so that whole event is going to be very interactive. We're obviously featuring the 5 finalists, which are international. And we're hoping that there'll be a wonderful conversation that starts to happen in the breakout sessions to give everyone an opportunity to meet some new people and maybe start other conversations offline and collaborate. So it's really all about networking. And the highlight, of course, are the finalists and then the 2 award winners.
Awesome. Well, I'm obviously super psyched about it. I want to make sure that we cover a little bit of your brand, a little bit of your journey building the Trish Tonaj brand. A lot of people don't think of it that way. A lot of people aren't that conscious of it. And I maintain that behind every business success is a successful person and a successful personal brand. But, give the audience a little bit of that and how you went about that.
Sure. Well, when I started my career, I started my first business doing customer and employee recognition programs for other companies. So anything branded merchandise. So we were building programs and then those folks were getting corporate branded material. So that's how I started my first business. And then from there, it sort of morphed. You got to listen to your customer because sometimes they start asking you for things that they can't find. And before you know it, you've moved yourself into a whole other direction. So I think I've rebranded probably 4 times in the 30 years. I went from the customer employee recognition programs. Then I went into business marketing, helping companies develop marketing plans that were going to be supportive of not only their brand, but giving them long-term strategic success. And then I sort of transitioned a little bit into doing some coaching with some entrepreneurs. And then I decided during COVID, okay, we need to do something a little different. And I've gone back to my love. I say trading a pen for a paintbrush. And I'm now an artist. So we do corporate work. I do individual work. I'm very blessed to have had a solo show at a Relay Chateau here in Ontario, which gave me some really wonderful exposure. And I now have work in Europe and the United States and Canada. So one of the abstract pieces is behind me.
I was going to ask.
This particular set. Yeah. So it's just, and I'm really passionate about it. And what I love is that I take all Hirsch, what's important to Hirsch. Let's talk about what's important to you. What colors do you love? What kind of things do you enjoy? What makes you feel wonderful in your own personal or workspace? And then we end up developing something that also involves your personality. So it's not just me throwing paint on the canvas and creating something and you go, oh, wow, that looks nice. I'll buy it. It's a little more interactive in that I want to try to capture something of the individual or their family in the work that I create. So it's a little bit of a different approach.
But it honestly has parallels to everything you've always done.
So
and I
true.
feel like that's why when we see, an actor who can sing or a writer who can dance, you see these things, they're just different expressions, but that same desire to connect is what drives you. That desire to put all these things out there, to put someone else's story out there.
Right.
For their benefit, and the benefit of the world is the same that you're doing with your art.
I say to everyone, listen, everyone's an artist. You had your very first art show in your parents' kitchen when they put your stuff up on the fridge, right? That was actually your very first gallery show. But then somewhere along the way, we lose the confidence to be able to express ourselves in whatever artistic medium that we chose. Some people go into music, others acting, like you say, singing, painting. But I don't know if I grew up in a house where I remember sitting at the dining room table and saying to my dad, geez, I'm going to be an artist. Well, his eyes crossed and he looked at me and he was like, I'm starved to death. Like, are you kidding? You can't be an artist. They're not getting money. And I thought, oh, well, geez, I guess that's not going to work out for me. So I took my creativity into marketing and became more of a strategic thinker and a big ideas kind of person. But now, to your point about stages and careers, now I have an opportunity to go back to that love and say, the money's not the primary driver. It's the smiles that are created when somebody looks at a piece of my work and goes, wow, this is what I see. And it's maybe in alignment with what you see, or it may be something totally different. And that's really where the magic happens.
Oh, yeah. And the refrigerator, the picture on the refrigerator, all I can say is I wouldn't say my parents discouraged me from being creative, but there was a picture that I had drawn of Willy Wonka. It was a sketch of Willy Wonka, and it was on my refrigerator at home for years and years, never sold. Never sold. And so,
never sold. You had to do more chores.
So then when I wanted to get into the arts, my parents said, look, if you had sold a couple of pictures, maybe that we could have some faith. No, I'm kidding. But it is true. We develop, hopefully, our fans and encourage our own families and kids. And there's no, in business, I will just draw this parallel and then I'll give you the last word. I have a question for you, but I would say that in art and business, there's never such a thing as a wrong creation. It's always something that's going to lead us to something else, something that's going to lead us to think. What I would say is looking ahead for people listening to the show who are building their brands, many of them kind of with their own two hands, the solopreneur, the one person band that's just out there doing it. What's a piece of advice or a little drop of inspiration that you can leave them with?
I would have to say I've been a solopreneur now for quite a few years. So I'm in that same little box, And I think one of the things that you have to do is, well, two, actually. One is find a mentor. Find someone that you respect who's in the place that you want to be and try to make a connection with them, because you'll find more often than not, I'm sure you're like this, Hirsch, if someone called you up and was a comedian and said, geez, can you tell me what that's all about? Have a coffee with them. You sit and have a conversation and say, yeah, I can tell you about my experience and it may or may not be valid for you, but sure, we'll have a conversation. So I think that's really important, making a connection with someone who's where you want to be, and then having a dialogue with them just to make sure that, it fulfills all the things that you think it's going to fulfill. And the second thing is network. You just never know who someone else knows, that sort of rinse and repeat. You may know someone that might be a great fit for me in my art, as an example, and vice versa. I might know someone who can help you out in some way. So I think it's really all about the reciprocity that comes from both mentorship and networking that will really help any solopreneur sort of break their barriers to their success.
All right.
If you liked the show,
Yes, and
it worked for you,
yes, then
subscribe and leave a
yes, friend.
5-star review.
Yes, friend.
Tell all your friends.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Did I make it clear?
Yes, friend.
Get your branding on
Yes.
before they're gone.
Yes.